Welcome to the Masters of Metrics podcast, helping you get more out of your digital marketing investment. This podcast is proudly hosted by Digivizer, a platform for people who want to grow their business by taking a data-driven approach. And now, here's your host, Emma Lo Russo.
So today I'm joined by Virginia Wheway, the Vice President of Data and Analytics at Koala. What a perfect fit for the Masters of Metrics podcast. Welcome, Virginia.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
I have to say I was particularly excited to interview you. You've got such an interesting and varied background, and I can't wait to hopefully have you share with our listeners. But let's just start with, you're in Sydney and we're in lockdown again for the last 2 months. How are you staying sane in this lockdown?
So I have my biggest one, I have a veggie patch. So
nice.
I'm very lucky to be one of those, I live in the inner west of Sydney, to be one of those people that has a veggie patch. So as often as I can, I'll go and poke around. And we're also one of those families that got a COVID puppy. So we've got a 10-month-old Moodle, and he's the cutest little fluffy guy. And so just having a dog forces you to get out and go for a walk. So yeah, but the homeschooling is not helping my sanity at all.
Our CTO has 4 boys under the age of 13, and I think he's like, I
got nothing to complain about. I've just got one. I've got nothing to complain about.
I'm lucky my kids are older. But where I'm going to be super excited is hearing how your career and your background. So you've got an honours degree in mathematics, a PhD in data mining, but you've also got a graduate diploma in epidemiology, which is really relevant right now. But how did you get from epidemiology to where you are today?
So the epidemiology came about. So I've spent most of my career at Boeing. And so when I returned, I lived in the US for 3 years. When I returned from the US, my husband was also with Boeing. He's an aerospace engineer, and he was sort of stationed at Williamtown Air Force Base in Newcastle. And so for me as a mathematician, the university was the place, where I could find the most enjoyable work. And I ended up on a public health project. And as part of that project, they supported me to do extra studies. So I studied epidemiology through that. And then unfortunately, well, not fortunately, as luck would have it, Boeing Australia then came and headhunted me, and I joined Boeing Australia. So my epidemiological career was really only 18 months long, but I find myself now, watching the ABC and yelling at the TV sometimes with some of the conclusions they make on charts. But I love watching the guest epidemiologists on ABC because they are way beyond anything I ever did.
And obviously very topical right now. So
exactly.
Very interesting. And it must frustrate you with all the experts, the data points of one. And
and when they go, it's the highest number of cases today, and I go, that's what an exponential curve does, people. So there's a little bit of that, commenting TV armchair commentary going on from me. Yes.
So I'm really keen, because obviously you're now in marketing analytics for Koala, or broader, right? Customer analytics, it's all about business outcomes. But you started in applied analytics through those industries. You talked about aviation, but you've also worked transport, mining, manufacturing, medicine, and futures trading. So can you unpack your career and sort of what's led you to where you are today?
So sort of a timeline, or?
Yeah, and maybe like what drove your decisions or your passions or your interests along that way?
So I grew up in Wollongong, in the Gong, and as was the time in the late 80s or the 80s, BHP was very big local industry down there, and they offered cadetships straight out of high school. So I went from high school to a mathematics cadetship with BHP, even though I wanted to be a vet. All I ever wanted to be was a vet. But I had very convincing and influential parents that said, hey, you're very good at mathematics, and how about you go and work and someone will pay for your uni degree and you'll come out with experience. And so I went the parental advice route. But then once I got into it, and 6 months in, I thought, actually, no, this really spoke to me, because at school you were more of a general, you did a lot of subjects. And then when I found the subject that I really loved and saw that it could be applied in a lot of places, then I really thought, this is for me. And so then, unfortunately, as is the case in many careers, BHP had a big restructuring, redundancy. So not long after graduating, I was made redundant from my first sort of grown-up job. And I actually used that money to go and do a PhD. So I was able to make the decision and go, yep, I can self-fund a PhD. So that's how I ended up. And at the time, data mining was the hot word. I think, now it's all around data science, analytics, machine learning. Back in the 90s, data mining was what, this field was called. So I went to UNSW and then also to Wollongong to finish a PhD in data mining. And then it was very amazing that I met a lovely man who's now my husband. And he was an aerospace engineer and had a secondment to go to Seattle. And it just so happened that someone I was studying with knocked back a job at Boeing in Seattle and gave them my name. And then the rest is history with that. But the big crazy story with that one is that I was meant to go and basically start work on 9/12, so the day after 9/11. And so I was still in Australia, all ready to fly out. In the middle of the night, my sister called and said, you might want to turn the TV on. And so unfortunately, that job at that point in time fell through, the Boeing job. But my fiance was in Seattle and we wanted to be together, and we had no house and no car. So I went over as a tourist and we had a very, very quick wedding. I volunteered at a folk festival for 6 months, and then finally the Boeing job was reinstated, once the dust settled. And I really, really loved my time at Boeing, but we had decided to come back to Australia. So I unfortunately had to resign from Boeing in the US, which was really sad. And hopefully we'll get into some of the really cool problems that I've gotten to work on as a data professional. And so then, went from Seattle to Newcastle in Australia, which was where my brief epidemiological career happened. And then I managed to sort of be headhunted back into Boeing's Australian division and loved working there. Did a lot of mathematical leadership and R&D, and ended up, interestingly, I was doing the carbon tax modelling for Boeing and the aviation industry in Australia back in the day when there was carbon tax and a lot of debate around that. So I started in that position because I was mathematical, but then I ended up leading that whole function, so environment, health and safety. So I had 3 to 5 years, not as a mathematician, but as a risk manager and environment, health and safety director. And then do I just keep explaining?
Yeah. I mean, I'm so it's so interesting. And
I just keep going. And so then, unfortunately, well, I'm pretty good at redundancies, unfortunately. But I guess a message to listeners too is that, sometimes redundancy can be seen as being, the end of, the end of life as we know it. But every time it's happened, I've picked myself up and found, other very, very interesting and rewarding things to do. So sadly, when the carbon debate and carbon tax was off the table, I was made redundant from Boeing again. Mm-hmm. And then at the time, the Transport for New South Wales had a general manager of transport statistics, or the Bureau of Statistics position. So I was successful in that role. And so jumped from, kind of big corporate and very high technology to a public sector department and leading a team of 50 analysts. So everything from counting how many people, go through Strathfield Station at 8 o'clock in the morning to where are the new housing developments and what sort of roads and transport infrastructure do we need for the future. And even interesting things like how do people evade fares and what are all the different methods and counting those sorts of things and estimating the loss. And then unfortunately, another restructure happened. So what am I up to now? Redundancy number 3. So
opportunity number 3.
Opportunity number three. And then I was approached by a consulting firm, so an economics consulting firm that were looking to set up an analytics practice. So went and did that for a year and got involved heavily in the economics of transport analytics. So what does it cost per hour of congestion on a particular piece of road? What's the economic cost? Basically in terms of lost productivity. It's not the petrol and we did look at the environmental, the fumes, the petrol, the everything, but what's the economic cost of having, all of these very workers stuck in traffic multiplied by every road across Sydney. So that was a really, really interesting piece of work, using mobile phone data to estimate where people were stuck. And then from there was headhunted by BHP to move to Brisbane and head up analytics for a new centre they were setting up in Brisbane, and really ummed and ahed because I really love Sydney and was sort of enjoying that. I had a young child, but the opportunity was just too interesting to be able to go and set up, a team from scratch, a team of 50 data professionals in BHP. So we packed our car and our guinea pigs and drove up to Brisbane and lived there for 2 years. And so did a lot of really interesting predictive analytics of failures of equipment and that sort of thing. So basically trying to improve productivity and reduce the downtime. And so I then moved from BHP into Thiess, which are also a mining services company in Brisbane. But at that time, definitely my heart and my family's heart was we wanted to come back to Sydney. So that was always on my mind. And fortunately, at Thiess, who are owned by CIMIC, so CIMIC are the parent company of Thiess, which for those in Australia, it's sort of the old Leighton Holdings plus. So I was actually very fortunate to be promoted to the Chief Data Officer of CIMIC, so staying with the same company. And then that allowed me to, do an awesome and more impactful job, but to also get back to Sydney. So moved back to Sydney with CIMIC. And gosh, the Koala thing was I wouldn't even say it was a rash decision, but I think, in COVID, a lot of us sort of 3 to 6 months in are sort of, what am I doing with my life? And the Koala job popped up just out of the blue, and something in me said, you know what, I'm just going to, put my hat in the ring for this. So I wasn't, miserable at CIMIC or, really wanting to get out, but just the job came across my feed and piqued my interest, and here I am. So that was very long-winded, but that's
no.
where I've been.
It's actually extraordinary. And I think there were two things you touched on, and I'd love to explore this further from your perspective. And I'm sorry, I didn't ask these questions earlier in prep, but I'm so keen to see what's your view of how the importance or understanding the value of data analytics or data science or, insights-driven value of your type of role or team and organisation. How has that changed, given you've gone through so many different kind of companies and industries, but they were pretty big, influential projects. Has that changed in that time from your perspective?
Yeah, it has, interestingly. So for your listeners, I'm 50, so I just turned 50 this year. So it means when I started my career in statistics and maths, it was in the TQM and total quality management days. So a lot of it was around, it was mostly industries and manufacturing, looking at control charts. Data tended to be quite small, and to process and store the data was very expensive. So you had to make the most of not a lot of data. And then in the 90s, when I guess data mining became popular, people knew that it was cool and it could do something. But if I'm perfectly honest, I don't think anyone or society really got that true value out of it in that phase. And then I was fortunate enough to join a company like Boeing, which is very, very technologically focused, very disciplined, and as you can imagine, has a lot of data. And so the project I worked on at Boeing, which is the funnest thing I've ever worked on, was using black box data to predict when an aircraft is going to need maintenance. So instead of using a black box when in a catastrophe, when something crashes, it's actually collecting all of that data in real time. So a bunch of us mathematicians and the marketing department got our heads together, and we were able to predict that in real time while you're flying, what's the probability you're going to need to replace the air conditioning or the landing gear. So Boeing was the first place I worked that really, I would say, made money out of their data. I know you talk about monetization of data, but this was monetization by getting insights that no one else could, and then selling those insights back to the airlines, rather than pure monetization of selling, lists of people or consumer behavior. And sorry, so back on the question, then I say I have found various roles where there is more lip service than willingness, because you really do need to be willing to invest and to be patient with data. It's very rare to come into an organization where everything's beautifully, rose columns. This one talks to that one, we know exactly. So I think companies that will really succeed in data are the ones that are willing to invest in that horrible, grungy, untangling of it. And I often say to them, we just have to eat our veggies for a while before we can have dessert and do all of these cool analytics that you read about in magazines or in case studies. But the willingness to invest and the patience to let the data team, just be buried underground for a little while to... Yes, if that answered your question. So I sort of...
Yeah, no, I mean, I think you're right. You also talked about technology changing even the cost of processing data. And so you're able to move up, I guess, the value chain in what you can do. But having also worked, I guess, from a marketing perspective and then as an organisation leader previously in corporate before starting Digivizer, I definitely saw this change in under appreciating the value and the economic drivers that could have in an organisation, as opposed to, say, just cost optimization or a campaign effectiveness. This was much greater in terms of its value to an organisation. Do you think technology, you talked about the change in the naming, right? It started as data mining and then, now it's all AI and what does this all mean?
Yeah.
How much of that is just the awareness, the technology? Where are we in our maturation of understanding that or realising its value?
Gosh, it's interesting. I think there's a lot of, I get approached by a lot of software vendors, a lot of bespoke software that does AI, machine learning, because I think that they're the two terms that really resonate with people. And again, I often joke about, not that anyone's flying, but in the Qantas magazines and those sort of glossy business magazines, they're the words that are thrown around. Apply AI, on your real-time data to get actionable insights. That's sort of one of the standard buzz.
Every startup includes it.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, firstly, to be able to get alongside people and explain what those terms actually mean, and then to also, I think that we do have a role as professionals sometimes to keep, I guess, it keeps some people honest, I suppose, if they're trying to sell AI and ML as this, you can just feed it anything and you'll magically, optimize your business. I think we also really have a big education role on what that actually is and what is possible given A, your data maturity, and then B, your capability what capability you have in-house, and then also where the world is at. There's not many examples of Deep Blue and those, the really strong human logic systems out there.
We might come back a bit later in this interview to just talk about, from a leadership perspective, what do leaders need to think about to make decisions and manage, I guess, that adoption and how to get value. That black box example was super cool, right? If it sounds like you actually...
Sorry, I use that.
All your examples were super cool.
I use it all the time, that example, but it's the coolest. So I've actually got a US patent for inventing the algorithm that can predict using a black box when an aircraft is going to need maintenance and how long. So it's pretty cool. I've got this plaque thing. Boeing are making a lot of money out of it because they're selling the smarts to airlines. But when you join a company, you sign over the IP rights, but you also get a chance to work on cool stuff. So I never would have been able to solve that on my own if I wasn't at Boeing and having it presented to me.
And I think that the greater driver for people hearing that, and for me, is like, yes, they might be making money, but think of all the saving of people or the injuries that would come from preventing the worst of the consequence of not having maintenance at the right time.
Exactly. But even we had to try and put a cost on. So a diversion would mean, say you were meant to go to Sydney and you had to go to Melbourne. We had to try and put a human cost so obviously there's a cost to have to put people in hotels and shuttle buses and that sort of thing. But like, how much have you annoyed your customers, and what, you do enough of that and you get a reputation. So we need to put a cost on annoying people. So on diversions as well as the actual physical costs. So super interesting project. Yeah.
So let's bring it to Koala today. like you're relatively new there to the rest of your career. How has that been different for you? What are you building in terms of Koala's maturity in managing data? What's exciting that's happening there, if you're able to share anything?
Yeah, so it's interesting when I interviewed and they were saying, oh, you've come from big corporate and it's pretty fast paced here. And I'm like, I'm energetic, I can handle that, but it is fast. It is insanely fast paced. So it's funny. So it's insanely fast paced, and I'm sorry, you probably heard some of my Slack. I've just hopefully muted it now. It's just constant Slack in the background of messages, and so it's balancing Koala. Yes, I get that you need to know these things really quickly, but you also need to allow me time to build a team, build a platform, and build the strategy. And come back to me in 6 months, and I promise you, I'll have something much more usable. But in terms of the sorts of data, I guess if you think of, say real-time clickstream on a website, so consumer behaviour on a website, the way we would look at that was similar to what we looked at in CIMIC and TEAS on trucks. So truck GPSs and truck sensors are real-time behaviour. Aircraft black boxes are real-time behaviour. So it's sort of the maths and the analytics behind it is really no different. I've just had to learn how a different world works, and as a consumer, learning all the tricks that companies use to market to us. So it's that at Koala, I've never had such an experience of a two-speed, like the two-speed economy, of that really fast-paced. What was the conversion rate on a sofa in Japan on a Sunday? And please give me time to build this really slow, in their view, but slow but absolutely necessary foundational work.
I was actually going to ask you, you've set up teams before. This is a new function, isn't it, really, at Koala? So you've got this same thing of, like you say, how do you balance what they need today to actually building this kind of power foundation of insight? What are the challenges when you are going into an organisation, and you can use Koala as an example, but in terms of what are the questions that should be guiding the platform, the foundation, the team that you're building? Do you start with the questions and then look at the foundations, or do you try and build the modelling and then ask the questions of it? Where does that sit and what challenges have you faced?
Yeah, sure. So as you've probably seen in my career, I've had quite a few greenfield roles, and I sort of feel that in analytics, that's probably my niche spot, is going in somewhere and setting things up from scratch. And so rather than immediately filling out an org chart or filling out a strategy, I probably sometimes put myself under a bit of heat, because I try and be that, I get alongside people and I try and build that influence, that education. Why did you think you needed someone like me and the team I'm about to build? What keeps you awake at night? What do you already know, if you do know anything from your data? So at the start, even in many places I've been given an org chart and said, go forth and fill this in, I've actually said no, deep breath, give me 90 days, 3 months. And I sometimes put a bit of heat on myself because it creates extra work. But I think having that foundational trust, influence, that sort of thing. And then I sort of say, then I hopefully become a bit like a Pied Piper, and they follow me, and then they also trust when I say we need to hire say a data visualization person before a data scientist, or we need a web data engineer before this. Then by having that time, then you work out where they are on their journey, because a data professional is not, as you know, they're not all equal. There's probably about 7 or 8 different job titles. So to work that out, usually after about 3 months.
Yes. So in a marketing organisation, and Koala's very consumer and, as you said, fast-paced. Actually, I don't know, Virginia, we can still hear your Slack, yeah.
I know. I thought I'd I'm really sorry. I thought I'd you know what I mean?
Turned it off, yeah.
Yeah. So hopefully that will fix that now. I really thought I'd muted it, but I just signed out of the whole thing.
Okay.
So, yeah.
No problem. Yeah. Okay, so I'll just ask that question again. So going into Koala, which has been a very successful marketing launch of a brand and consumer-led, and you talked about the pace that's there. How is that different from what you've done before? How did you get across what the metrics were? Is anything different about what you've done before? I know you said some of the data is the same and how you might approach it is the same, but what have you had to learn in this particular case?
I learned the magic funnel. I didn't know what a funnel. So my first couple of days, I was sitting there going, okay, so this is obviously something I should. So I was like in the background Googling what a funnel was. So I learned, I guess, a lot of the fundamentals of the industry. But also I think I'm just trying to think, if we're working on a truck to try and work out, okay, should we maintain this part earlier or later? You've got some time to think about it. Whereas if we turn on this ad or this particular wording, because Koala can be a bit cheeky, if we could turn on this particular wording and it doesn't resonate, we can't just sit there for 2 days and let so we can collect some data about it. So it was that needing to make some pretty quick decisions, but being under that pressure is a strong word, but under the expectation that we'd be using data to make those decisions. So that's sort of what I mean about pace, and sort of they wanted to know very quickly, did this make a difference in Japan or that? And so which one should we switch on at 2 p.m? So that was very much about the pace. And then I found the more I offered or the more I gave, the more they wanted. So it was like they'd been thirsty for so long and were waiting for someone like me to come. And even particularly, I don't know if you'll get to it, around insights around COVID and the impacts of COVID on Koala, and then
sure.
The industry. So even when I was able to break it down and show them that Koala are actually doing very well in COVID, because I guess people are at home. I don't like my couch, I'm going to treat myself to some new sheets, or, it's all about home and nesting. And so that I was actually able to quantify, this was the heartbeat before COVID and this is where we're at now, and by state and by product. They were like, that to me was that one thing that really then switched people on. And then they started coming with, more and more and more requests. And so everything from logistics and supply logistics to customer service tickets. So what are the common themes on help desk, and is it weighted by regional, metro? Is there a particular product that causes problems? So that's the help desk, then to that, acquiring customers and making money, really. So
wow. And you talked about Japan versus Australia and the impact of COVID. Is it actually different for the way that countries are dealing with things or the way we nest? Is that something you've discovered in time?
Yeah, it is. It is. Japan actually, interestingly, and I apologise to any Japanese listeners, has a very high seasonality. I think that it's called moving season, I think. So in Japan, it's an annual cycle that if people are going to move house, I think they tend to move in a very specific time period. So whereas in Australia, we were seeing a COVID effect, in Japan, the moving season effect was swamping the COVID effect. So
interesting.
That's what we noticed. And we've recently opened in South Korea, but it's only, we've only been there for a month. So it'll be exciting to see how just even how people live in their spaces. In Japan, we did a lot of video studies of people sort of roll up their beds during the day and they use their space for something different, and then they roll the bed down at night. So the needs for those guys compared to us Australians with our supposed, big houses is very different. So
interesting. So you talked about with Koala, the kind of, can we have a decision or your recommendation by 2 p.m? What's the data telling us? Do we dial up this campaign or not? What is it the power of the question that drives how you focus, like those answers and the depth? Because you talked about the more you give, the more that's being asked.
Yeah.
Like, how do you balance that when you're setting up in this stage?
So I try and balance it with, because if you just race off and go, all right, you calculate, you might be answering they might have asked the question, but it's not what they really meant to ask. So I always spend time up front going, well, what are you really trying to ask? And if I just even this week, I've been working on our customer service ticket. So I just, the incoming ticket data. And so to me, it's a very different question if you're trying to measure what's the effort of customers. So how many tickets are coming in? And some of them might be, missed calls, hang-ups, versus are you trying to measure what are the actual issues taking up people's time? So to me, it's a very different. So one's a customer lens. So what is the customer calling about? And the other lens is like an internal efficiency metric, for want of a better word. And so if I was to just race away and, get down the list of dot points, I might not be answering the right, they're coming at from a customer angle or from a Koala efficiency angle. So that's just, one example.
I mean, I love that you just talk to the questions that you probe, or they're trying to understand what they really want. And I think that comes to what decisions are going to be made off this as well. That often that what people ask, or if they just hope that data will tell them, it doesn't necessarily lead to, is this material enough? Does this create opportunity? Is this a decision that we want to make? And
so what, really?
Yeah.
So I could do all these very beautiful things to go, it's 50% more likely in rural areas that people, buy green sheets. And if it all comes from a Sydney warehouse or a Melbourne warehouse, then
does it? Yeah.
Who cares?
Yeah.
And if it becomes in regional areas, 50% of people are more likely to have a delivery issue, for example. I've just made that up. But then you can go, well, okay, so that's something we can probably take action on. That's an example of, two very interesting, funky insights that one of them really is immaterial.
Yes. Apart from the what decision are you making, I love that you just use the simple 2-word question, so what? What does this actually mean? Like, so what? How significant, like what does this actually represent in terms of the value to a business?
Yeah, because there's so much pretty cool data in Koala and many places. So, as a mathematician or analyst, I could have a great time working out trends, but for what benefit?
So you talked about in your pre-interview chat about often you're being asked to build analytics dashboards and tools that people will use. What's your advice around that?
Yes, gosh, I've unfortunately seen so many places launch into dashboards that never get looked at.
Yeah.
And
why don't they get looked at? So maybe it'd be good.
Because unfortunately the data behind them isn't. So all it takes is one person, and even one particularly influential person. So, you're all there, the ELT, everyone's got their clicky dashboards, and it just takes one person to go, but hang on, mine says, 17,000 and yours says 16,000. And then it just takes that one little breach of trust or of the expectation. So my advice is that rather than investing, running headfirst and buying the latest and greatest software and getting a data viz team, is to do that fundamental data engineering. Not everything has to be perfect, but just get some runs on the board with 2 or 3 examples where you can hand on heart stand up with that data and it'll be believed. And we had exactly that thing at Koala. We had existing dashboards, and then people would go, oh, no, I don't trust that. Or I downloaded the data in Excel and I did some stuff and I got a different answer. So it's the data engineering that you really should be doing first.
Interesting.
As easy as it is to click and do a cool dashboard very quickly.
So back to the leadership of data, and this is an area that I feel passionate about. Apart from being a marketer and organisation leader that loved insights to make decisions, and then now being in a position where the understanding what decisions are being made from this, but the story that needs to be told with it to actually capture the interest and make this live and be part of an organisation. What's your advice, or what have you learned from a leadership in building that culture of that it needs to live and it has to be trusted? How do you build that trust and that culture?
It takes quite a bit of energy, to be honest. So I've had to put myself forward a lot as a leader, and often I'm the first data leader in a company, or I'm the first in the new team that they're developing. So it does take a lot of energy, persistence, consistency. So you just have to keep showing up and showing up. And sometimes you just need to find that nugget that's going to flick, that's going to turn them on or flick the switch. So keep showing up, being consistent and drilling in and working out, okay, what really is going to, get that first spark going. And then once you've sort of done that, I build sort of almost organically from that. I don't have a this is my magic template or my magic governance template for this. I find that it's quite an organic process because every organization and every partner in an organization is different, but it's showing that you understand where they're at and that you can help them. So that's what it's really, in the first instance, that's what it's about. And then it's ensuring that you are very discerning with the team that you hire and the skills that you hire and the order that you hire them in as well. So I've seen a lot of places throw money at big teams and saying just hoover up the data market out there to build a team. But where we've had most success is, being very deliberate about how we build that team. And then, as a lead, leadership is, all the other leadership principles apply in data as well, as other fields. But I think also I think it has helped me that I've got that, and it's not necessarily the case for everyone, but that I do have a mathematical, technical background. So I can make nerdy jokes with the data science team, but then they also know that when I'm speaking to the ELT that I've 100% got their back and that I get what they do.
Yes.
Yeah, so that's the thing too. A lot of the very, very clever, highly skilled people, they really like it when their leader gets or values and advocates for what they do.
And I think that also, talking about the credibility in the data, like to know, like if you're going to stand up and this is what you're recommending and backing your team, then you make sure that it is something that you stand behind, and the team make sure it's something that they'd stand behind as well. So I can see that being very important. Is there one metric you've seen a business, and if it's Koala, that you think is the most important, and particularly for an e-commerce store that you've now gone into, or the e-commerce proposition? What do you think is the most important thing?
So I wouldn't necessarily say a metric in particular, but I think a tool of the trade is using cumulative sums and cumulative charts in metrics. And so hear me out on this one. So often, and maybe this comes from my days in control charting back in the 80s and 90s, but if you imagine if you've got, I can't really show it visually, but if you've got a sales signal that's sort of bouncing around and you think that's okay, it's within a certain range, but then if you add up the differences in the amount of sales you get every day, and if it's starting to trend down, you will pick that up much more quickly with a cumulative sum chart than you will, waiting for a normal, fitting a normal trend line down. So I wouldn't say it's here's the magic metric to make your business successful. But if you're looking at just implementing some simple metrics, have a go at cumulative change in revenue, cumulative change in the number of users to your site or the number of people you're engaging with. Gosh, even cumulative change in conversion rate, you can see if you're starting to lose, and it picks it up very quickly.
Yes.
And it's easy to communicate as well. Once you sort of explain what you're doing and you put a chart with an elbow in front of an ELT, they can very quickly see, okay, something is happening. Please explain that to me.
Yes. I mean, I'm glad that you've said that, because it's true that rate of change becomes so important in like SaaS companies or e-commerce companies, because it can still look good, but it doesn't necessarily equal. Yeah.
And if you've got, if you're saying, okay, we're happy for revenue, I'm just make this up to be between, I don't know, $100,000 and $120,000 a day, say. So you've got this and everything's bouncing around and it's fine. But within that bouncing round, you might be losing ground day on day, week on week. And a normal chart won't pick that up.
Yes.
And say the fast-moving world we've been talking about, you can't wait weeks to work out if you're starting to lose ground, or or that you've changed something on a site and you're losing.
So Koala have won like lots of, or like has been recognised, I should say, around their digital marketing and being very good at making fast decisions. They really did exceptionally well and understood their cost per acquisition and where to play to win very well. How fast are the decisions like that you've seen? Is this something where, the cost of marketing is such is the business? Like, how quickly are you looking to feed the engine?
Yeah, hourly, 2 hourly. So that's why I say sometimes I wasn't joking when I said, yeah.
Yeah, when you're saying by 2 p.m, but they told you at 1 p.m.
Yeah, something like that. No, it does. Obviously, if we're going to change website material or internal, digital material, the tech team needs to develop stuff. But if they're saying, I'm just trying to think of an example where we've done it. Sorry, I'm having a little bit of a breather thinking about an example. Just even perhaps if you're marketing to the wrong people. So just say you might be on sale and then you market to people who bought something full price.
Yes, right.
Yeah, so we can very quickly go, oh, whoa, hang on, and then very quickly
adjust accordingly.
That. And then the way we collect our data is close to real time. So we can very quickly see, I think we're looking to go every 15 minutes for some stuff, and then real time for the clickstream data. So we can see a reaction very quickly.
It sounds like the whole organisation culture, though, is very appreciative of that data to make the decisions. So they must have some data culture embedded in them, even though you're kind of like you're bringing in a level of expertise they might not have seen before.
Yeah, so I certainly had predecessors, and even the founder of the company is a very strong digital marketer or marketing analytics person. So he set up some amazing foundations and obviously started the conversations around these are the things we need to look at, and even, if this goes down, that's good. If this goes up, that's good. Those sorts of conversations. But I think, again, now I use the COVID example that we a team can come in and say we can actually break down, COVID versus non-COVID, regional versus metro, different warehouses, even some of the global shipping issues that are happening with COVID. So how do we balance demand forecasting with knowing it takes longer, but it's more of a risk? So yes, I think so. We've, how did I say, we've increased perhaps the breadth and maturity of the sorts of questions that are being asked.
And is that because you're asking the right questions to get to the maturity of those questions? Do you think
hopefully,
there's part of that?
Yeah. Or as I said, even I distill the information and go, okay, if I do this little piece of analysis and then present it, I think it will, bring people alive and question. And so I've been successful in doing a couple of those examples, and people have gone, oh, so if you can do that, can you do this and can you do that?
Yeah.
Hence we're hiring.
So you talked about sometimes it's better to get the foundations right and work on a few things to build that credibility and then to build from that, which I actually think is great advice. I'm going to ask you two different pieces of advice. Someone that's going in that might be thinking about being more a marketing analyst. So they're coming from this lens. There's lots of budgets being spent. This is the area that they want to apply their data analytics expertise. What advice do you give someone that's building their career in data analytics or marketing analytics?
Gosh, so get very good at questioning and being curious. So again, these days there are so many amazing tools. You can click a dashboard together really quickly. You can do a, rotating heat map, and that can really impress, say, your bosses or the company. But if you're not curious about, hang on, why does that doesn't look right? Did someone, if I use Koala as an example, someone put the phone number in the wrong format, so we lost. If you're trying to draw a chart and I go, oh, it didn't read 20% of our customers because the phone number was in the wrong format. If you don't have those curiosity skills or look for that, then you won't get, how do I say, you'll probably trip up a bit is what I say. And even though your bosses may not see that you went through that data and double checked that all the phone numbers were right, you can then stand there proud knowing that you did that and that you can hand on heart know what you've done. Because sort of, again, like with the dashboards, it just takes one little mistrust or one little slip up and then you can lose a lot of credibility, unfortunately. No matter how clever you are and how skilled you are, just be curious.
I love that. And I think, the underpinning piece that you just suggested was ask the why of why is this looking different to why the change? that's the curiosity being answered.
Yeah.
What about to the marketer on the other side? So say, and we often will get someone that might be more brand focused by background and they're now heading up marketing. What advice would you give a marketing leader, knowing the value that you've seen taking this approach?
So you mean about how to use people like
just like advice? Yeah. What advice would you give?
This is really hard because I've been in this game for a year and I've been an analytics professional for 30 years.
Well, an organisation is truthfully a marketer, right? Like they're responsible for the customer experience. But what advice would you give?
So I'd say as a marketer, I guess hopefully assuming that they do have some data or analytics people at their, as a resource or, in their company, is to don't be afraid to ask the questions, and that the data people actually get a real buzz out of people engaging with them. So even if you think, oh my God, they're so clever with data, I couldn't possibly ask that, just build the relationship and we get a real buzz out of the more functions that talk to us. And then it's a partnership. It's not can you do this for me? Can you do this for me? It's a real partnership. So please just start asking the questions, even as random, obscure, stupid, or whatever as you think it might be. We would love to hear them.
Love it. And that adds to that curiosity from their side as well, and the partnership, I think, the collaboration, shoulder to shoulder, how do you solve this opportunity for an organisation?
Yeah, so it's not just to do this for me and then we just magically hand this thing back on a platter. It's a two-way, very much so.
Virginia, it's been so interesting. I'm going to move into the rapid fire questions, and this means it doesn't matter what people's background, it's just about you. Okay. So what is your guilty pleasure?
Cheese Doritos.
Oh.
Is that okay? Or when no one's home, sneaking a tub of ice cream and eating it with a spoon.
Love it. If you had to pick a brand or brands that inspire you, who are they and why?
Okay, so I love Rolly. They're a brand of shoe. They're actually a startup company as well. So they were designed with help from an air host or a steward person who had, the sore feet thing. So they were designed from a need. So I love brands that meet a need, not just I'm just going to make some cool thing. So I love Rolly, and their customer service returns. I guess it's similar to a Koala model, very, very customer focused and quite unique design. Mass market brand. Sorry, I'm not being very rapid fire about this.
I haven't heard. I mean, I know who Rolly is, but I love that as an example. That's fine.
Yeah, okay. No, so I'm also going. So I'm more into sort of bespoke, smaller brands than big brands, and so I'm also into Hunter Candles, who are a local. So they do a lot of bush essences and that sort of thing. So it's sort of they find their tribe, and then they do really well in that tribe. And yeah,
sounds like you're very instinctively listening to the customer. Anyhow, even though you said you're only new to marketing, it sounds like you're doing this anyhow.
I am anyhow. And I think I like to say, so I must admit I'm a big op shopper, but when I buy stuff, I'm quite discerning and I know what I want, and I will get what I want. And price often isn't much of a factor, because when you know what you want and it's the right brand, then yeah.
It's good. It works. If you could pick an age that you could stay for the rest of your life, what age would that be and why?
Gosh, my 30s. So, I was a bit more sensible. So, in your 20s, you're a bit silly. I was more financially independent. And I finished my PhD when I was 30, and I met my husband when I was 30, moved to America when I was, in my early 30s. So to me, in my life, my 30s were really amazing, adventurous, free-spirited. I knew myself. I was successful, loved my job. Yeah. And then I had a baby at 40, and I've kind of just been tired for 10 years. So I wouldn't, although get back to me in a few years, because I just turned 50 and I think I'm going to like this because, I'm less of a mum to a young child, and I'm much more independent and, don't give as much of a crap about what people think about me as I did maybe in my 30s. But definitely I kept saying I killed it in my 30s. Yeah.
I love it. I love it. That's all we've got time for today, Virginia. I have enjoyed so much talking to you, and I actually really, really did want you for the Masters of Metrics podcast because there's not that many senior women that have built their profile. And, you know, I'm not saying you built a big profile, and this has been the most humble, very generous way of sharing your incredible career across so many industries, but just this lovely, accessible way that you approach an organisation of just getting to know what makes them tick and what's going to be important, what are those decisions that's going to be made, not going gung-ho, I want 50 people from day one that's going to, you know, create some over-promised outcome, but this getting foundations right and then building off that. I think it's been incredibly refreshing, really enjoyable. I know I could speak for hours with you. So what a joy.
Thank you. I was just going to say, sorry, briefly, also, so on that, for the people you hire, you don't want to bring in all these amazing gun people and then have them working in spreadsheets because the organisation's not ready for them. So sorry, I probably didn't.
Oh, that's a good point.
It's a two-way thing. I've had people in my teams that are, you know, they've got PhDs in forecasting and they're changing cells in Excel because the organisation wasn't ready for them yet. So it's for both people's benefit, both sides of the equation.
That's a good point. Thank you.